Good morning, DJ and PK. It's 97.5 The Zone. Welcome in on a Wednesday morning on what is going to be a very busy Wednesday night for you basketball fans. Actually, it's going to start in the late afternoon today. The Utes game at Houston, they were supposed to play yesterday, but it snowed in Houston. Everything's come to a grinding halt. This will shock you, but Houston doesn't have snowplows. So they're going to play today at 4 o'clock. That'll be on ESPN+. That game will wrap up about 6, which is when the Jazz will be tipping off with Oklahoma City. The Thunder are 35-7. They are winning, winning 5 out of every 6 games. They got the best record in the West. They ought to drill the Jazz. If there was a game where the Jazz wanted to play everybody, put Markkanen back in, and I don't know if Clarkson can go. Collins has been out for a long time. But whoever is healthy enough to go, anybody who's been kind of in a gray area or just resting, play them. Oklahoma City will win this game. And then, people tweak something and you can sit them out in the next game. The Jazz will play the Thunder tonight at 6. And then at 7 o'clock, Nevada is at Utah State. That game's on FS1. So there's plenty of hoops to watch tonight. The Jazz now have the second worst record in the NBA. They still have 10 wins, and the Toronto Raptors just won their 11th game yesterday. They beat the Orlando Magic, actually beat them pretty easily. And so the Jazz now, only the Wizards have a worse record. I don't think the Jazz are going to catch the Wizards. That would surprise me. I expect the Wizards will be the 30th best team in the NBA this year. But the Jazz can be 29 and maximize their lottery odds and minimize how far they can fall if things don't break their way. If you're the second worst team in the NBA, you can't draft any worse than 6th. So we'll see how this goes. Jazz and Thunder tonight, and the Raptors picked up a win last night, so they are on 11 victories now, and Hornets are on 11, and the Pelicans are on 12, and they've all moved past the Jazz, who have 10 wins. Washington's stuck on 6 right now. And then we had some basketball last night. I don't know if you stayed up late and watched BYU. It was a weird game. They were playing Colorado, who's winless in the Big 12, and Colorado was up 32-22, and BYU caught fire, got locked in, went on a run, and man, did that game change. They've been talking in the in the college football playoffs. Notre Dame's got this thing about winning the middle 8 minutes. You score at the end of the half, you score at the start of the half, and it really changes the course of a football game. So in the basketball version of that, BYU closes the first half, down 32-22 with like 6 minutes left, whatever it was. And they go on a 16-4 run to close the half, and they're up 38-36. From 10 down to up 2, thanks to this 16-4 run. And then, as if that's not enough, they come out and open the second half with a 23-2 run, which gave them a 23-point lead, and that was the ball game. That was it. They won 83-67. It was just basically trade hoops down the stretch and get out of there. Saunders led him. He had 25 points. Nell had 14. They both shot the 3 well. They had Colorado's defense on a string. I mean, they just moved those guys around. The ball moved. It didn't stick. And the ball moved. Guys got open shots. They shot threes with their feet set underneath them. They attacked inside out a couple times, where you see the ball going low to Troy, and he'd kick it back out. They found Keita with a spectacular dunk on alley-oop. They really had a little bit of everything as they dominated the worst team in the league. Colorado drops to 0-7 and 9-9 on the season. BYU improves to 12-6, and they are now 3-4 in conference play. And they got a winnable game coming up on the weekend with Cincinnati. Totally winnable game. Cincinnati lost yesterday, so they dropped to 2-5 in the conference. They are not a good team. They got beat by Texas Tech, went into Cincinnati, and Texas Tech is good. They're 14-4. They went in and beat Cincinnati 81-71. It's a wacky league. Crazy things happen. Some games are predictable. Iowa State at home destroyed UCF, beat them by 25, 108-83. But at the same time, Arizona State went in and beat 23rd ranked West Virginia 65-57. Didn't see that coming. ASU going cross country on the road, long trip, and they win at West Virginia. So all kinds of wild stuff happens. Arizona won at Oklahoma State. That's to be expected. BYU at Colorado. And then today we got 3 more games. Kansas is at TCU. That could be intriguing. Kansas State is at Baylor. And Utah's at Houston. And Utah has Baylor next, so if you want to, you fans, check that out. These look like 2 difficult games for the Utes. If they can win either one of them and be 4-4, then they get what looks like on paper a soft stretch in the league. So, still a chance here for them to get on a roll here as we get into the middle of the conference season. All right, there you go. There's your college hoops and your pro hoops to get you started. The night in basketball. And the Utah Hockey Club, with a little time off, they start their road trip in Minnesota on Thursday, so they take a little breather here. They didn't even practice yesterday. We're going to take a break. When we come back, though, you're going to hear from Mike Folta, radio play-by-play voice of the Utah Hockey Club, and we'll talk with him about where things sit after a homestand that ended well, but largely didn't go well. They were 1-4, but then they won their last two games to go 3-4 on the homestand. Mike Folta coming up next. Stay with us. Good morning, DJ and PK, proudly presented by our title sponsor, Black Desert Resort, Utah's premier golf resort. All right, time now for a little hockey. The Utah Hockey Club, this is crazy. They got a losing record at home. They got a winning record on the road. Sort of like the Jazz. I mean, the Jazz obviously don't have a winning record on the road, but they do have a dramatically better record on the road than they do at home. I don't know what's going on at the Delta Center. It used to be playing in front of fans here. At elevation was an advantage. It's not working out that way this year. It is a bizarro year. The Utah Hockey Club going out on the road now, 3 out of 4. And it starts with Minnesota Thursday. They've got to go to Winnipeg, who they just beat 5-2 here on Sunday, and then they got to go to Ottawa also. So on paper, it's a very difficult trip. But the Utah Hockey Club has been nothing if not unpredictable. You know, they've gotten good wins, beating Vegas. They beat Minnesota. They beat Winnipeg. So even though it was a great trip, they beat 2 of the 3 teams. And they played Ottawa earlier, and they got beat pretty handily. So we talked with Mike Folta about that, developing a little consistency here. And some of the young guys are clicking in, although the injuries keep piling up. And the Bear, man, Bear just doesn't want to hear about it. Andre Tourney gets asked about that, and he's like, I don't want to talk about us being completely healthy. It never happens. And he's right. I mean, you got 4 lines, 3 players each, right? So there's 12 attacking players. You usually have 3 pairs of defensemen. That's 18. 2 goaltenders. That's 20. You're not going to keep 20 guys healthy. It's not going to happen. And he pointed out the only team they faced all year that was healthy was Montreal. And then the night before the game, a Montreal player got hit as a pedestrian by a car on the streets of Salt Lake. And so then they end up not being healthy. And so to his point, he told this story, I guess it was Saturday morning after practice. And he said maybe it was after a pregame skate on Sunday. But anyways, it was on the weekend. He said, it just doesn't happen. It's not going to happen to us. It doesn't happen to anybody. It's too many players, and the sport's too physical. So, all right, here's Mike Folta talking hockey with PK and I. A little late to the party, but we didn't get him on our first couple attempts, but finally got on and got to talk some hockey with him. Here's Mike. Mike, good morning.
Good morning, gentlemen. So sorry for missing you earlier. You caught me out celebrating the big win last night.
I figured. Just rolling in. That's how the Boilermakers do it.
Especially in Salt Lake City, Utah, the town that never sleeps.
On a Monday night, yeah. Hey, it was 2 big points for the hockey club against one of the league's best teams in the Winnipeg Jets last night. It was a real character win. I think it's one of the biggest wins of the year for this group. And they did it without 2 of their best players, Dylan Guenther and Mikhail Sergachev, banged up. So it says a lot about this team. The captain, Clayton Keller, got hit in the eye with a puck, went back to the room, got 12 stitches, comes right out, and helps contribute to the game's first goal. I mean, it was just a whale of a night at Delta Center.
You got hit in the eye. Cut me, Mick. I like it.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because when they come out, you know, they still got the adrenaline pumping, all that stuff, and it doesn't look as bad when they're on the bench. But usually after the game, in the post-game media scrum, you can see it start to swell up a little bit. So I'm sure he's got a pretty nice shiner here today.
You mentioned the best win of the year. Obviously, they beat the Minnesota Wild. That was a good win. They beat Winnipeg. That was a good win. They had the 6-0 win over Vegas, who leads their division. That's a good win. Am I missing something else? What is the best win of the year?
I think it's got to be this one. I think when you consider the circumstance, you know, we're rolling along here in January, and we're kind of getting to the point in the year where you need to pick up points, and you're starting to look at the standings. And I thought Winnipeg brought it tonight, or last night. I don't think the Jets played a bad game like that. 6-0 win against Vegas. The Golden Knights came out pretty flat, and give credit to Utah. They put up 4 goals in the first period, and Jackson Stauber had himself a nice night in net. But last night against the Jets, you're playing a team that seemingly doesn't have any weaknesses. I mean, they're a top 3 offensive team. They have the best goalie in the NHL. They have multiple lines that could score. and Utah matched them for the first half of the game, and then right after they saw their captain come back onto the ice after injury, they rallied around him and scored a couple goals there in the second, and then added some insurance in the third.
The win is very impressive, particularly they've been struggling to score goals, and obviously they got a lot of them, and they got momentum and all that. And so the mark of any individual, the mark of any great team is consistency. And we've been talking about consistency with this team now for multiple months. And so is the consistency actually the inconsistency, or is there the possibility of them getting consistent in terms of winning?
I think part of the consistency issue is the fact that for a lot of this season, and especially now, Utah gets in these situations where you'll get guys playing just simply more minutes than probably what they should. And there's a lot of math and philosophy that goes into this. But you look at a guy like Michael Kesselring, who had a power play goal a couple nights ago against St. Louis. He's a pretty young defenseman, but is really talented. And without Mikhail Sergachev in the lineup these last couple nights, he's had to play more. And other guys have had to play more. Ian Cole, a veteran defenseman, has had to play, upwards of 22, 23 minutes, when instead he probably should be playing 21 minutes or something along those lines. These are kind of arbitrary numbers, but the point remains the same. Without guys in the lineup and with a younger team, you get some guys that kind of get exposed by playing a little bit more than what they should. And so I think that's where some of what we call the inconsistency comes into play, where these guys are just being put in more situations than what they're used to. And I think that can take its toll. It can be okay in a short sample size, but over time, they get exposed, and that's when you need those steady hands to eat up minutes, especially defensively. A guy like Mikhail Sergachev, who's a minute muncher. I mean, he plays as much as anybody in the NHL, and to have him out of the lineup is a huge gap defensively for Utah. But guys have stepped up, and Kesselring and Cole were pretty good last night. Nick DeSimone is the next man into the lineup. He's filled in on that third defensive pair. And then John Marino as well, coming back from injury. He's still only 4 games into his season. He's been good in an expanded role as he still tries to get his sea legs here. So everybody has to step up and pull on the rope a little bit harder. But it'll be another great test coming up on Thursday against the Minnesota team that is not all that far behind what Winnipeg can do.
I'm about to drop an oxymoron in you that will require all the academic prowess of a Purdue Boilermaker to straighten out. Focus. Even though it was a long Monday night and Tuesday morning after the win, you have to focus on this. I would just like to see partial consistency out of them. Now, partial consistency, I get some of the up and down performances against the top of the league and even the middle of the league. They're 4 points out of a berth. Now, the Calgary has a game in hand, so maybe ultimately they'll be 6 points out. We'll see what Calgary does with that extra game. The reason they're out is what they've done against the bottom of the league. Can they at least take care of business? Because right now I can look at a road trip and say, you're playing the top teams in the league, you're playing the middle, you're playing the bottom, you ought to do this, you ought to do that. But it's a waste of time because they're all over the map. Can they at least start beating the teams that are in the bottom third of the league? Because those points alone would make this playoff race look very different.
Yeah, and it is regrettable. I mean, you think back to a couple games where Utah blew a 3+ goal lead. I mean, they're leading by 3 against San Jose and Anaheim. The Ducks and the Sharks, 2 of the worst teams in the league, and they blow both of those games, and they pick up 1 point, but they should have picked up 2 in each of those. And it's interesting because last night, without 2 of your best players and against one of the league's best in Winnipeg, there was definitely like a galvanizing type of feel, like an us versus them type of mentality and a certain urgency that came in. But when Utah was up 4-1 against the lowly San Jose Sharks back in October, like the team lost that feel, right? They lost that urgency and that desperation that we saw from them last night in a high pressure scenario. And so, yeah, I mean, I get what you're saying. This team has got to figure out a way to find that desperation against the teams that it, quote unquote, should beat. But that's the NHL. It's a salary cap league. Every single team is capable of beating anybody on any given night, even if you're up 4-1 on them. And that's a hard lesson that Utah hopefully has learned, and hopefully will fuel them in future 4-1 leads when they're up over one of the lower teams in the standings. But this team has 13 blown lead losses, and holding a lead is something that Utah has struggled with a bit, although they were able to seal it last night when they needed to. And there's not going to be a lot of easy games coming up. You've got three games on this road trip on the way against teams that are in playoff positions. You got Minnesota, Winnipeg again, and then the Ottawa Senators, who have looked really good since they last saw Utah and beat the wheels off Utah 4-0 at Delta Center.
I'm wondering, as you say, that any team can beat any team on any given night, and we've seen that particularly with this team as they go on the road, that it really doesn't matter that they're on the road when they get to playing the actual games, but maybe the road trip in and of itself is what's difficult, meaning just having to travel and having to go to different cities and all that stuff, as opposed to just playing the games, is more the road trip itself has the negative effect rather than them being able to win on the road, because they've proven they've win on the road. What do you think about that theory?
I think that's definitely baked into kind of the road records in the NHL is the travel, especially in the Western Conference. I mean, Utah is going to be spending as much time in the air, this team, as anybody in the NHL. I don't have the exact miles or minutes in the air, but I know that this team is going to be flying and spending as much time on a plane as any other team across the league. And so that definitely wears on you. And coming up, we've got a back-to-back, Minnesota and Winnipeg, back-to-back nights. So that's a little difficult. But to be honest, guys, like, they make the travel as easy as possible on you. I mean, you drive onto the tarmac, there's a charter plane waiting for you. When you get on board, they ask you if you want steak or chicken. Like, you're not exactly waiting at the security gate for an hour trying to pass through, and you're not taking your shoes off or anything in the TSA line. So it's a pretty glamorous way to travel, and they put us up in nice hotels. It's a far cry from the bus rides of the minor leagues, which a lot of these guys have had to endure.
What do you think a game like the win over Winnipeg does for someone like Josh Doan, who's been sent down, been called back on the fringe of the to get out there and to have 2 assists and help build that lead? It's got to be a major confidence boost, doesn't it?
Yeah, and he got sent down to Tucson just to touch the puck a little bit more. He was starting to play, closer to 10 minutes a night earlier in the season. And once you're playing 10 minutes or less a night, that's kind of when I think General Manager Bill Armstrong would rather see a young guy spend time in the AHL and feel the puck and be an important part of that team. And he did. He played really well in the American Hockey League, comes back up, and he's been a factor. Him and Barrett Hayton, I was talking with Doan about this earlier, him and Hayton form a really nice kind of two-man group on that forward line. They're both really hard on pucks. Josh Doan has an unbelievable stick on the primary assist that he gave to Barrett Hayton. He lifts the stick of Neil Pionk and then plays the puck over to Barrett Hayton all in one motion. I mean, it was a really savvy play from a kid who's just 22 years old, and I think he has such a bright future just because he's hard to play against, but he's also got a lot of skill that can lead to offense. And we saw that last night, that line of Josh Doan and Barrett Hayton, along with Matthias Michelli, who's the third man on that group. They produced 2 goals in the third period for Utah to really kind of establish firm control of that game. And they ended up needing those goals because Winnipeg came back with a pair in the third.
What's the prognosis for Sergachev?
Yeah, he was supposed to be doubtful last night. Like, there was a chance he would play. He came onto the ice before morning skate and then, realized he wasn't going to be able to go. So He's still technically going to be day-to-day, it sounds like. I don't know his prognosis as far as if he's even going to travel or anything like that. I haven't heard from Bear on that. But my hope would be that we see him at some point on the road trip. But he was listed as doubtful, essentially, for that game last night. And once he got on the ice and tried to go in the morning, it was no dice. So hopefully we get him back at some point soon, because he's a huge piece of the team. And if this team is going to be a playoff team, they need number 98 back in the lineup.
Is that no dice or no ice?
It's no dice at the Shark Club in Manitoba, the casino attached to the connected to the rink. No dice for Mikey. I'm going to be playing this one close to the vest on the road trip. Got to button it up, guys, for these two coming up. Two big games. All
right, there's Mike Folta, radio voice of the Utah Hockey Club. We love having him on the show. He is on the show each week here on The Zone, usually on Tuesday mornings. We're going to take a break. When we come back, we're talking hoops with Steve Cleveland. Stay with us. Good morning, DJ and PK. It's 97.5 The Zone. Steve Cleveland joined us on the show yesterday. Now, obviously, at that point, BYU hadn't beaten Colorado, 83-76 the final. The Cougars closed the first half with an impressive 16-4 run, opened the second half with an even more impressive 23-2 run, and they go on to win the game 83-67. Colorado's 0-7 in the league. They're in last place. BYU improves to 3-4, and they got Cincinnati at home on the weekend, so they got a chance to get back to 500 and get to 4-4. Obviously, Steve didn't know about that game, reflected more on what had gone wrong against Utah, and I thought a lot of those problems got solved. Now, time will tell whether they actually got solved or they only got solved against Colorado, who's 0-7 in the Big 12. But the ball moved much better. It didn't stick. They attacked side to side. They attacked inside and then back out again. They shot the three well because they got really good looks. I mean, they had feet set, space, good look, and they made a bunch of them, and they went on a run and won the game. Here's Steve Cleveland with PK and I. Steve, good morning.
Good morning, guys.
Well, you've had a couple days. You've gotten over the shock of all those missed free throws. You pulled yourself together. That had to be a little horrifying for the ex-coach.
Oh, boy. I'll tell you what. Nobody's guarding you. You know, there's a lot of noise. I mean, if you're BYU, obviously it gets a little crazy, but, yeah, you just go home and feel sick after games like that when you have so many opportunities. And, I mean, you start looking at I think we had this conversation. I had a conversation yesterday in relative to free throws. And, you know, how do you shoot 22 more free throws and win by one? So it's just one of those things that it was a typical Utah BYU game. Competitive right to the end, lots of mistakes, not great shooting, but, you know, Asar, is that how you pronounce his name, Asar?
Yes.
Yes, okay. Yeah, what a
Unless I'm wrong, too, which, you know, I wouldn't rule out, but go ahead, Steve.
yeah. So, anyway, what a night he had, and I know that's not typically been his role with other guys. Matson's kind of struggled from the field in games where normally he's really played well, but I was so impressed with him. I'm so impressed with Utah's ability to defend, and I think, you know, we see that big free throw discrepancy, but, you know, they pounded it inside and took care of business on the boards, and you know, not sure why Utah didn't win that by 10 or 15, to be honest with you, as many free throws as they shot, but it was a good win for Utah. They really competed, and not that BYU didn't either. But you just can't win games on the road when you're shooting 8 for 30 from the three. And, you know, it's hard to win on the road to do that. And I think they only shot like 10 free throws. So that's not the formula for success when you're on the road. But congratulations to Utah. I mean, they just competed. I was just impressed with their intensity, their toughness. They just controlled the paint. They got good size. And it was a fun game to watch.
BYU's trying to live up to these expectations that were put upon them. They probably had them for themselves. And it reminds me of, I think you'd already established yourself as an NCAA tournament team when you were coaching. And there was one season that you got off to a slow start, and the pressure was really mounting. And I remember talking to you. You had to do. You went down to Southern California like on a Monday or Tuesday, and those were days where you were playing mostly Thursday, Saturday. So you got away for a couple of days, and you told me, you said, man, I came back, and while I was down there, I felt like I could just breathe. And you said it, and you could just see the anguish in your face, because the team wasn't performing to the level that it was supposed to. It was early, and you ended up making the NCAA tournament. But the point I'm making is when you were going through a little bit of a slump at the start, when the expectations were really high, it was like the pressure you were battling, the team was battling the pressure that goes along with these expectations. And you got to the point where you deserve those expectations because you earned them. So when a team is having some expectations and not living up to them still at the start of the conference season, when you got the majority of them to conference games remaining, how do you just relax and play ball and not get caught up in all of the expectation that has a tendency to drown you a bit?
That's a great question. And I'll tell you, there's not a coach in the world that hasn't gone through that. And it's what you don't do when you see them down and struggling. This is not the time to berate them, to constantly talk about the things they're not doing well. It's kind of like you get them together. I've taken teams we've gone away from. We never left really when I was at BYU and at Fresno State. I don't remember leaving town with the team or not, but myself, you're absolutely right. I think the first thing that a coach has to do, and I know it's a challenging thing when the bright lights are there and there's so many expectations, and with this BYU team, there was lots of expectations with, guys coming from Russia, who come from all over the world, and with high expectations, and Catchings and obviously Demon were the two that had really high expectations. It's just debilitating. There's so much stress, there's so much pressure. It's not like these kids don't watch TV and listen to the experts, and so as a coach, you've got to keep them grounded. You've got to keep them okay, and you have to sometimes spend a lot of time. Right now. I've focused in on one or two guys that were struggling and took them out to dinner and just went and had lunch or did something where we could get away from it all and just let them know how much I loved them and how much that, you can do this, and just a lot of positivity and support, and you have to do that. But watching film for me, I think is the best thing I ever did. One-on-one, by myself, in my office or somewhere else, and you just sit down and watch. And I've been thinking about BYU in just the last few days, and I'm thinking statistics don't lie. And statistics can be pretty glossy when you go 12-1 in the preseason and everything looks good and everybody's double-figure scoring. But I was looking at the league stats for BYU. And it's interesting to see, for instance, Devin right now is shooting 12% from the three. Baker, who is a really solid guy that can score, he's shooting 21% from the three. Mag, 27%. Catchings, 28%. Who is a really good shooter, has just been really difficult. I mean, those are great numbers. And those weren't numbers that were reflected in the preseason. But when you're shooting poorly, you have to look at a couple of things. One, what's our execution look like? Are we always taking contested shots? What are the circumstances? But I do like watching film. And I think that when you can do it one-on-one and it's positive and letting them, what do you think? What are you doing? I think you just have to really stay positive. This is not the time to get into kids because they're missing open shots. You get into guys when they're not playing hard, when they're not giving great effort, when they're not being good teammates. And I'm not suggesting any of those things are happening because I don't know. I'm not in the locker room. But I've been in enough locker rooms for 35, 36 years to know that sometimes you can get a little bit chippy. And guys, kind of get into each other a little bit. And part of that for me, I remember being a junior college coach, and I was dealing with a lot of young men from all over the world as well. And there wasn't great chemistry, and there was just some chippiness. But it was also that same attitude and just that emotion that sometimes gets you over the hump. And guys got to look at each other and hold each other accountable. I've coached a lot of teams that had player meetings on their own that I had no idea took place. That's a good sign. And if there was ever a time for a group of guys who had high expectations, and some of them were so unrealistic, and, I don't know, I don't think the coaches, I don't blame coaches. Like, I've never heard the coaches of BYU come out and talk about kids and talk about this and talk about that. That's usually the media. That's the fans. I get that, and that makes sense. But I think, a guy like Trevor Nell's been there 6-7 years. He's a guy that is one of the leaders. Dallin Hall is a leader. Why not have a, players meeting? Why not get the guys together and talk about it and take some responsibility for it? And I'm not suggesting they're not, but sometimes having a coach around all the time doesn't work either. But if you have someone like Demon or Catchings who came in with high expectations and are kind of struggling as freshmen, and they are, man, those are the times you got to go one-on-one. You got to get them by themselves, and I know they have all these support staff and everybody that can help them mentally with the mind, all that kind of thing. But just as a coach that loves these kids, that takes the time to really spend time with those that are really struggling, or even a kid like Dallin Hall, who is a leader of that team, for him to have, kind of opportunities to sit down with younger guys and talk to it. I mean, you got to do those things, and it's got to stay positive. And things can turn around pretty quickly, I mean, they're going to Colorado, which I've watched Colorado games. They lost by 1 to UCF. They lost by 6 to Cincy. One was away. I mean, Colorado's 0-6, but they're playing at home and they're hungry. And BYU needs to come ready to play because they can't show up like they did against Utah. I know they're 0-6 and everybody thinks they're going to win, but I also know that good coaching, they've got good players. They're kind of in a rut. If they were ever hungry, the hungrier team in the conference right now is Colorado. So you can't ignore what they're about to go to, but those are 2 winnable games. And I think that just kind of those different kind of experiences to help them get through this rut and get through it, and been some of the things that I've done to kind of get through tough times.
I get the whole analytics argument. 3 is more than 2. And, over a course of 10 possessions, if you can shoot 40% from 3, that's better than shooting 50% from 2. But when I watch the Utes, when I watch the Cougars, when I watch the Jazz, I see guys shooting more than 50% from 2. And I'm thinking, well, that changes the analytics. And I see guys taking 3-pointers. Steve, shot recognition. And I get your point about being positive. So maybe the conversation has to be, let's start with, you're a good player. You're a good shooter. But you got to give yourself a chance to be good. Maybe dribbling into 3s isn't your strength right now. Maybe the contested shooting 3s off one leg, fading away against pressure. You're not going to shoot 40% on those shots, so that wrecks the whole analytics theory. So I think the shot recognition, and I see it with the young Jazz players, we certainly saw it on display in the Ute and Cougar game. It's got to start with shot recognition. You're right about presenting it in a positive way, but it feels like it has to be presented.
Oh, no. You used the word contested. And I don't have the analytics for that game last night, but I will just say this, and 35, 36, 37 years of coaching, that was a real pet peeve for me. It's like, and hey, sometimes you have to shoot contested shots late in the shot clock, circumstances, you don't have any choice. But shooting contested shots early in the shot clock is a no-no. And that usually and oftentimes is the reason, numbers go from, I shot 46% in the preseason, and now league conference play, people are guarding us, and we're not overwhelming teams that we're supposed to beat. I love the fact that you brought that up, because contested shots are something that you take late in the shot clock if needed, but you make the extra pass, and those are things that impact percentages, those things that are impacting confidence, because if it's a one more philosophy. Just one more pass, just one more until we get to the guy that's open. And so taking contested jump shots or 3-point shots early in the shot clock can kind of destroy the morale of a team, and it's the perfect formula for losing. And you got to find ways to do that. The other thing is that there really isn't. I mean, I guess Foose is probably the one player that obviously he's a big inside that can do some things there. But even he's averaging 8 points a game. He's shooting 53% from the free throw line. But I'm just wondering if there are other ways we can get people into the post. I saw it a little bit in a couple of games with Devin. But Saunders is a young man that's been the most consistent player of this team, and he's done it through 46% 3-point shooting and 53% field goal, and that's during conference play. But when he's not perfect and on, and things aren't going right, BYU really has a hard time scoring. And now has his moments, but to only have one player in league play in double figures, you need more than that. And I don't have an answer for that, but it's one of those things that somebody needs to step up. And and for me personally, I think you keep going to Foose. Keita is what Keita is. He's a rim protector. He's a rim you can dunk, and he's a defensive presence, but he struggles scoring. There just hasn't been. I mean, look, Hall is at 6 games. Demon is at 8 points a game. Baker's at 6 points a game. To not have another double-figure scorer says something about, are they taking contested shots? Are they not making the extra pass? I guess it's all of those things that you can evaluate and watch film. And I'm not sitting down watching film, but if I'm coaching that team, there's a personal part of it, the positivity part where you get them alone, you got to talk to them, and there's another part where we just watch film. One-on-one, let's watch film. And watching film together as a team it's good because you can hold the players can see that coaches are holding everyone accountable. But for me, the best success I ever had was getting a one-on-one. And that's not a yelling and screaming meeting. That's hey, let's take a look at this. How can we get better? And those are the kinds of things you're doing. And, hey, it's hard, man, when things aren't going well. And I don't remember the time that I left, but, man, I'm sure if I did, it's probably just to get my brain clean and clear because it is stressful, man. That's the thing, too, is it's not just stressful on coaches. It's stressful on young people, and more so today maybe than ever, where everything is so transparent. I mean, everything. You can't hide from anything. And you make a mistake, you say something, you do something in a game that's foolish, it's just magnified more than it was maybe 20 or 30 years ago when there were only, a couple of Division I games on the weekend. Today it's different. There's just everything. There's such a transparency here that it can be difficult at times on young players to hear people talk about them. And I hope these kids are watching and listening to the media because, I guess, though I'll say this, just kind of the things we've talked about already. They're not going to be listening to talk radio, and they're not going to probably watch the TV. But at the end of the day, these young men need to take responsibility for themselves. This isn't just a coaching situation. However, I will say this about a new coaching staff, and obviously you've got great coaches there, but they're learning too. And they would be the first to admit it. Well, they're trying to figure out how we can get this thing turned around. These are coaches that have been around the world and coached, have a lot of success and a lot of experience, but nobody's more frustrated than them right now. And, I'm hoping that they get this thing turned around and find out what clicks. But all of the things we've talked about are things that they have to do now.
Yeah, I think you told me you went down, you had to speak at an alumni event at Irvine or something.
Yeah, that's probably what it was.
For some reason, it just stuck in my mind. And, you talk about these coaches and all. You can have 50 years of experience, but this is your first time coaching these kids. And so you haven't gone through the ups and downs. You're going through a little bit of a down now, but everything you go through basically is a first because you have nothing to draw on individually with this team, these guys. I think that's part of the deal that maybe we underestimated.
Yes. Well, and sometimes it's as simple as let's go bowling tonight. I mean, well, you could smile and laugh and have fun a little bit and take some of that pressure off. There's a lot of different ways to take pressure off of young men that are 18 years of age. I mean, you look at them in Catchings and Boscovich, well, not Boscovich, but certainly them and Catchings, who are, they're 18, 19, I think they're both 18 years old. And it's not been easy for them. And so, and you could see the pressure on the faces of the guys sometimes, even watching the games. And when they make mistakes and their head goes down, and you got to always have, for those moments, you always have to have an assistant coach that you're sensitive to guys that are struggling with confidence, to just make sure your assistants get up and, get over there, give them a hug, give them five, and just that way, you'll be okay. You're going to be okay. It's got to be positive. It can't be negative. If you make bonehead mistakes and do some things that are things you should have been prepared for, it's different. Your coach can get into a kid during the course of a game. For the most part, you need to stay positive and get them believing and thinking that I'm going to get back in there and do it right.
It's interesting you mentioned the 18-year-olds. All the draft stuff is about how good they're going to be when they're 25, right? All the NBA teams are projecting ahead to what you're going to be when you're 25, 27, 30 years old. But can you win right now? And a lot of the high draft picks are not. Some are. One guy at Illinois, Kaspris Jaconis, I don't know, I'm butchering his last name. They're winning. And he's putting up numbers, and he's soared in some places as high as number 3. But a lot of these guys, a lot of these teams that are counting on guys, Rutgers has 2 of the top, depending on what you believe, 3, 4, 5 guys in the draft. They're a 500 team. And there's elite guys at Oklahoma, Texas, Maryland, and most of them are struggling. Duke is not, and Illinois is not. So you can win with these kids, but it seems like at best it's a coin flip.
Yeah. That's a really sound point there that you made here, and that we do kind of forget that they're 18, and they're playing against 22 and 23-year-old guys that have been playing in that conference for 3 or 4 years. It's just that experience and the toughness and having gone through it and having failed and gotten back up and succeeded. All of those experiences that come with a junior or a senior. The 18-year-old player, there's a few exceptions, which you just mentioned, but for the most part, you're not seeing freshmen that are, taking teams to the NCAA tournament, unless they're a one-and-done type guy that is there or transferred there. It's the older players. It's the players that have had some success, and the transfer portal. As interesting as that can be, I think as you look, and I haven't done this and probably won't, but statistically, I just wonder, as you look at guys that have been at maybe 2 schools or even 3 schools, but they've had a lot of different experiences by the time they're juniors or seniors and have failed somewhere and jump back on it, and you'll see them have success because they're older and they've been through it. And whatever the reasons were for leaving the school, it's a second chance, and these guys get in a program. It's just that experience. Having been somewhere for 2 years and making mistakes, even when I was, we didn't have any transfer portal and any of that, but I loved getting junior college players. They were hungry. They had been through it. They were tough. They hadn't been babied and coddled. They had to scratch and claw to get to the next level, and it made all the difference in the world. And, 2 guys that come to my mind was Terrell Day and Ron Solis. And even though Ron ended up leaving BYU for circumstances, those guys, that was the thing. I remember even a young man like Brian Dignan. Here's a guy that's 6'3", tough kid. He's played at Cuesta Community College. He came in there and had an impact on a program that he would never have had as a freshman. And I know not many, junior colleges almost seems to be fading away, but that experience, now the experience we have is you've been in the transfer portal twice, and finally, by the time you're 21 years old and have played for 3 teams, you're ready to go. So just that the experiences of coming from a transfer situation and a second chance type deal, guys that are hungry, I'd be interested to see the impact that transfer portal players have had to coming to other programs and the success they found. But I know my experience in junior college players, they were hungry. You know, I know nobody was hungrier than Rafer Alston. You know, he'd been at Ventura. He came to Fresno City. You know, he was trying to prove something, and that he belonged. And obviously he did, and ended up 14 years in the league. But you got to have that kind of mentality and attitude. And even though the blue bloods at BYU and the players, they're great people. They're all great young men. But there's got to be some toughness, and there's got to be some leadership there. I'm not sure who the leader is. You know, and we can say, well, Nellie's been there for a long time, and maybe it's Fallon Hall, but it wouldn't hurt either to have 2 or 3 leaders in that team that can help this younger group and kind of get through this, rather than just always be the coaches.
All right, there's Steve Cleveland. When we come back, what is trending? The headlines are coming up next.